Welcome to the IDP Plus Advice Show this week. Today we're going to be talking about defensive tackles and interior defensive linemen, and specifically who's going to rise into the top 24 this coming year in 2025 and who's going to fall out. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. All righty, I am your host, Ricky Rodriguez. You can find me on X at RickyRod66. I'm joined today by Sean Teague. You can find him at Sean8386. And I've been publicizing that over the last few shows that Sean was going to join me with his great knowledge and experience. And here he is, folks. So glad to have you, Sean.
Hey, I'm glad to be back, Ricky. I don't know if I have great knowledge and experience, but I am here as advertised.
All right. Well, good to have you, buddy. All right. As I mentioned in kicking off, we're going to focus on defensive tackles / interior defensive linemen. Who's going to jump into the top 24? Who's going to fall out of the top 24? And our rationale for many of these players. We're going to do this for all five true positions on defense, and we're going to circle and do some offense as well over the next several shows. So we encourage you to listen and join in for those. But where we're going to start was with something that people aren't that familiar with, and I think it's very important for people to know. And we're going to look back at some numbers in terms of why we're doing this show and the education we want to provide to everyone. On the screen here, you have a 10-year study of from an IDP perspective, the average number of repeaters by true position. So that's why I've been calling this defensive tackle / interior defensive lineman. And of course, edge, defensive end / OLB, outside linebackers, of where many leagues are going to with this from a true position perspective. And what you see here, particularly, let's focus on the defensive tackle / interior defensive lineman, which I'm probably going to just call defensive tackles going forward, is that on average of the top 12, only from the previous season, only 6 of those players end up repeating in the top 12. Of the total top 24, only 11 of them end up repeating. So now, Sean, I believe you did some digging into the Kings Classic scoring, which is something we're going to talk about here shortly, but because we use their scoring system for making our hypotheses here and our recommendations. But with that digging that you did into the Kings Classic, how did these numbers play out based on your research?
Yeah, so looking at this at first, I thought, what, these numbers seem kind of low. Surely it's higher than that. And this is from like 10 years ago. And so I looked back at the previous couple years in the Kings Classic, and the numbers are actually worse. So
they're even worse.
They're even worse. So from 22 to 23, only 5 of the top 12 repeated, and 15 of the top 24, which was actually better. And then last year, only 3 repeated from the previous year to finish in the top 12. And for the top 24, it was down to 11, which is, where this is. So the rate for the top guys seems to fluctuate a lot more than, the overall top 24. So it's interesting how well this is still held up with all these changes in fantasy over the years. You're going from traditional 3-4 and 4-3 players to grouping everybody into DTs and edge rushers, and it's still holding up. So I was pretty impressed with all this.
Yeah, and to clarify, this is a 10-year average, not from 10 years ago. I just want to clarify for our audience here that this was an average of a 10-year period.
Right.
So it continues to stand, which is even in the Kings Classic. Now, many different scoring systems in many different leagues, so these might be slightly off. But the main message, I like to quote the great Bob Harris, the football diehard, who always talks about, let's focus on drafting this year's best team and not last year's best team. And so by looking at this, it gets you thinking about, how do I make sure I don't draft last year's best team for this coming year? I do want to mention too that this also applies to offense. While I don't have the numbers up here, when we do the offensive shows, you'll see the numbers. Because like running backs, if I remember correctly, only 5 of the top 12 repeat year over year. But I'll get those exact numbers when we get into the offensive shows. But just want to give you a flavor of how you got to maybe think differently when you're getting ready for either your redrafts or even when you're thinking about dynasty trades as well. So let's move and take a look at the scoring systems here. We're not going to bore everybody with the whole scoring system. For those that are watching via YouTube, you can look and see the screen and see all the numbers for all the different positions and scoring by tackles, assisted tackles, sacks, etc. But what I just wanted to briefly point out on this is that the Kings Classic scoring system is designed to where out of the top 100 players or 100 scorers, they're trying to get roughly 50 of them on offense and 50 of them on defense. So that's why it's designed as it is from a scoring perspective to really try and bring that balance. So some of you in dynasty leagues that are particularly with offense and IDP, just another way of understanding how we went through the logic that we did in putting these recommendations together. Okay. With that, let's go ahead and look at last year's top 24 scorers from the IDP perspective, from an IDP perspective. And Sean, when you look at this list, if we were winding the clock back a year ago, there's probably 3 or 4 right off the top of your head. I'm guessing that when you look at this list, you said, I would have never expected those 3 or 4 to be on that list. Who are, some 2, 3, 4 of the folks that are on this list that you wouldn't have expected a year ago at this time?
Probably the highest ranked one there would be Ashawn Robinson, a guy who's just been kind of a journeyman. He's played on several teams. He's kind of a run stuffer. He doesn't really put up big sack numbers or anything, and his tackles are nice. But looking back at the scoring, tackles compared to sacks, you get almost 3 times the amount of points, or over 3 times the amount of points for a sack. So the defensive tackles that can get the sacks are what really boosts the scoring here. Not your traditional tackle heavy leagues where just give me a guy that can get a bunch of tackles and the sacks are a bonus. This is actually the opposite. So seeing him on there at number 7 was a definite surprise. And then Adam Butler. Who was Adam Butler? that's the initial reaction there, which we know he filled in for Christian Wilkins there in Vegas. So those are the 2 that jump out the most, and then probably Emmanuel Ogbah sneaking in there in the top. That's somebody at the beginning of the year we kind of wrote off, just kind of forgot his existence was even out there, and here he is sneaking in the top 24 there at the bottom.
And when you bring up a name like Adam Butler, if we were looking at the Raiders depth chart a year ago, maybe we would have thought he was like number 4, number 4 defensive tackle, possibly even fighting to make the team as the number 5 DT if they carried 5. And here he is ending up at number 16. So one of the interesting things when I was looking at the list is seeing Zach Allen at the top of the list. And to your point, this league did reward for sacks, and Zach Allen did have a breakout year for sacks. Now, do I expect him to and he played, by the way, as a side note, almost 90% of the snaps or some ungodly number like that. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but between the number of snaps, getting those sacks, and he is a hustling machine generating those tackles as well. So he ended up on the top of that list this year. Just something to keep in mind as you are thinking about who you think might be who's going to jump into the top 24 this coming year.
Also with
go ahead, Sean.
Zach Allen there, that last big game of the or the fantasy season, what do you have? 4 sacks or something like that. It was a major game, so you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt too. Sure, he's probably still towards probably the top half of the top 12, but that really pushed him over the top. Just that one game, but that would have been in your playoffs. So you can think of a better time to have it.
And then, of course, there were some venerable veterans like that we expected to do much better than they did. Quinnen Williams with the Jets, and of course the Jets just were a true is cluster. I guess I can use the word cluster as long as I don't add another word after it. The Jets were a complete cluster last year. And Quinnen Williams, while I think he's capable of doing much better than this number 17 finish, I think it goes to show you that sometimes the dynamics around a team, the firing of a head coach who was also the head defensive coordinator, the quote defensive coordinator Albrecht becomes the head coach, so he's not paying as much attention to the defense because he doesn't have time. All those things come into play here, and all of a sudden you got Quinnen Williams, who's probably capable of being a top 8 on this list, falls in the top 17. So maybe there's certain teams that if you think they're going to be in the ditch, and you think their coach is going to get fired, and you think it's going to be a cluster of a situation, maybe that's someone you can take a look at as you all out there in the studio audience are considering your teams that you might want to take into consideration for some of these players.
Another guy that underperformed here, Namde Metabuke. They were looking going into last year. They had one of the best schedules for defensive tackles, and he had that big year the year before with double digits, 13 sacks or something like that. Got that big payday, and we kind of warned about, hey, that's going to be hard to repeat. But then the schedules came out. It was very favorable for defensive tackles, and here he is at 15 instead of top 5 or something like that. So expectations were high for him, and he didn't quite get there.
Yeah, and Sean, you bring up a good point. Someone has a big year, signs a massive contract. The years prior to that, I don't remember Matabuike's exact sack numbers, but they certainly weren't in the double-digit range. But so if you see someone going from 5 to 5, I'm just making up numbers here for a second, to 13, and then they get a big contract, or even if they don't get a big contract, sometimes as fantasy players, we always want to look at the positive and say, oh, wow, 13, he's going to get 12, 13 every year going forward. He's figured it out. When you go back and look and it was like a 4, a 5, and then 13, the reality is that 13 is probably an outlier, and the probability might be higher that he comes back down closer to the 4s and 5s than he is staying up in the 13s. Agree or disagree with that statement?
Absolutely. I went back to the previous couple years, like I said, and I dug around with some of that as well. Harrison Phillips from 2 years prior did the same thing with his sacks. They jumped up to like 9.5, and I think he was like a 4-sack kind of guy. And his tackles were in the 50, 60 range, I want to say, and maybe jumped up to 70 or 80. So one big year, get the contract, and then they fall back to where their averages were. So that's something to keep in mind. There seems to be at least one a year, if not a couple.
All right. So the task that I gave to Sean and myself, and we did this independently, was based on the fact that only 11 of the top 24, as for those that are watching can see on the slide, but just to make sure everybody is aware that might be listening on Spotify or just listening on YouTube, 11 of the top 24 repeat. That means 13 of the 24 do not repeat. So the task I gave Sean and myself was to pick 13 of these 24 players that we think are going to fall off, and then who we think will fall in or move into the top 24. So we're first going to go on the next slide. We're going to talk about who are the ones we think are going to fall off, and then we'll talk about the ones who we think are going to join the top 24. Now, I must admit, as I move to the next slide, that shows who we don't think is going to be repeating. Sean cheated.
I cheated,
and he cheated. He did give me a full 13. But what you see on the list right now is if a name is scratched out in red, so I'll just read through those for those in our listening audience. Ashawn Robinson, Calais Campbell, Adam Butler, Oza Odigizua, Grover Stewart, Vita Vea, Emmanuel Agba, John Franklin Myers. Well, Sean and I agree that those folks will fall out of the top 24 this year. And since Sean cheated, though, I went ahead and did my full 13. And the ones I added to the list, and we'll talk about several of these as we go through the show. One is Leonard Williams from the Seahawks. Two is Cam Hayward. Three, Kalijah Kancey. Four, Gervin Dexter. And five, Chris Jones. Yes, Chris Jones of the Kansas City Chiefs. So for those that are listening, I wanted to just quickly walk through those. So, and now we're going to talk about some of these players and why different reasons that we took them off the list. And Sean, I'm going to start off by asking you about you took off Ashawn Robinson, who you alluded to earlier. You start talking about the fact that he in the past he had a lot of tackles, but why else are you potentially taking him off of this list?
Yeah, so he basically took Derrick Brown's role and had Derrick Brown play the entire season instead of just one game. We could have expected him to probably hit these numbers. So he's had basically an entire year to get healthy and to come back from, I believe, a torn meniscus. And I expect him to jump back in, full go through camps and everything to be starting week one. He's going to take all these snaps back. I see Ashawn Robinson dropping back, maybe playing along beside him, rotational role, whatever. Derrick Brown was playing, I want to say 80 to 90% of the snaps the year before. So it's a full-time, very sizable role. And Robinson's not going to have that. So he's definitely going to fall out. At worst, they split time. So he was the first obvious answer for me. Seeing a guy that looked odd to be there, that's why it came down to an injury. And yeah, like I said, he's been a bit of a journeyman, and he's solid in the tackles. But looking at the scoring again, the tackles are not awarded as highly as most leagues. So we need somebody that can get the sacks. Derrick Brown could probably get 5, 6, 7 sacks plus the 80 tackles. Again, like I do think it's feasible just the way this defense is set up. Brown did it 2 years ago, and Robinson had pretty similar numbers last year. So that tells me it's not just the player; it's the defensive setup. It's their role in the defense itself. And Carolina hasn't done much to improve that to where I would think somebody else would come in and make these big plays. They haven't upgraded enough on defense for me to think that Derrick Brown would not be the main focal point here. So, yeah, Ashawn Robinson, easy drop for me.
All right, and Derrick Brown might be a little spoiler for who joins the top 24 here in a little bit as well.
So, Ricky, I'm sitting here looking at how many you got? What, 4 or 5 more guys than I dropped because you did not cheat.
Because I did not cheat.
Right, and several of your guys are they're the old guys, and 2 young guys, but mostly you're picking on the old guys here, and that bothers me. You guys should be sticking together. So, if you would elaborate why at one point this guy was a potential defensive player of the year last year, Leonard Williams sitting there at number 2. What's got you so sour on him?
Well, I guess as I was looking at who might potentially fall out, I do have this age factor in my head, particularly when it comes to dynasty. And Leonard Williams is one who turns 31, and so this coming year. So that's number one. He'll be 31 in June. If you look, there was a period of time, I believe it was over the last 5 weeks, he had 3 humongous games. And in this scoring system of those games, he had 36 points in one, 48 points in another, 29 in another. So if you take that away from the 234 points that he had, that's 113 of his 234 points in just 3 games. So if you start normalizing that to what he might have done on average in other games, it puts him borderline top 24. I just don't see the fluke, tip it to myself, interception, running back 90 yards kind of stuff happening on a recurring basis. That's an outlier in my opinion. So do I expect him to fall completely off the map? No, I do not. But I do see him in that 25 range. The other thing to keep in mind, Seattle did add DeMarcus Lawrence into the picture. Byron Murphy, the second, the number one draft pick from last year, he should expect to get more playing time along the interior as well. So I also think Williams will be scaled back on some of his snap counts as well. So that's my argument for bumping Leonard Williams out. Some people listening might disagree, call me an idiot, whatever. Please don't call me an idiot, but just choose to disagree.
Be nice.
And so that's my rationale on removing Leonard Williams. Now, in our studio audience, we will be going back and forth as you'll see here shortly. And so one of the ones I wanted to talk about with Sean is Osa Odigizua, who, by the way, happened to sign a big contract, as we were just talking about earlier. So talk about why you took Osa off of this list.
Yeah, so at first that was my thought process. Hey, he just got the big payday. We're going to expect him to drop back down to his averages. But then I got looking at his averages. He's actually been in the same ballpark the last 3 years. We're looking at 4 sacks, 3 sacks, 4.5 sacks, 43 tackles, 46 tackles, 47 tackles. Tackles for a loss aren't much different. They're all right there together. He did have about 10 more quarterback hits than the previous 2 years. So what I see here is a guy with very consistent, very solid floor, low ceiling. When we start bringing in some of these other guys who will be coming back from injuries or rookies, whoever we're going with here in a little while, a lot of those have higher ceilings than Osa. So although I don't really see his production changing, I just see where he will finish compared to his peers to either have him at the very bottom of this list or just outside of it. Other than that, this guy has actually been really consistent. He's just not really spectacular in either sacks or tackles. But yeah, that's it's nothing against him or his production. Just I think other guys will basically leapfrog him and just shuffle him down the list.
And of course, too, with the parting with Mike Zimmer as defensive coordinator, I almost said Mike Nolan, but Mike Zimmer.
Short of age there.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about aging. Although Nolan is coaching somewhere in the UFL. I digress. But so there is a new system involved here. And do you think a new system will have an impact on this? Oftentimes it has a bigger impact than we suspect when these new systems occur, even if it's just for earlier in the year, and that could make a difference. What do you think, Sean?
Sure, that's highly possible. I think the saving grace there is still playing next to Micah Parsons and having some youth, some proven rotational guys there on the other side too. I don't think there's enough weaknesses on this line to, I guess, add more blockers to him, to kind of push him out of the way. So I do think his role is pretty solid. I still feel good about it. I feel like they're probably the least affected interior defensive linemen. Basically, it's hold your guy or crash in the pocket there. So I'm not too worried about that. Okay. If we start getting into other positions, I could see it being a bigger issue, but I don't think we're going to have that problem here.
Okay. All right. Great.
If we flip over to your list again, another old guy. In fact, one of the oldest guys on this list, Mr. Cam Hayward, a lifetime Steeler, a guy who is a perennial top 12, 10, maybe even 5 guy when he's not injured. You're going to take him out. Why is that?
Well, between this list and the two of us on this show, there's only one person older than Cam Hayward, and that's me.
Maybe Calais Campbell. It's
yeah, my bad. You are absolutely right. Calais Campbell does have him at age 38 versus Cam Hayward's age 36 here. He just turned 36. I am finally betting against Father Time on Cam Hayward.
It's dangerous. Dangerous.
It is dangerous, but I am going to place that bet. If I'm going to take a chance on Quinnen Williams at his age, with Aaron Glenn coming into there versus Cam Hayward at 36, I'm going to go with Quinnen Williams this year as an example. So look, I'm also betting on Steelers chaos as I make this prediction as well. If Aaron Rodgers does go in there, I think there's chaos. Okay, from the Aaron Rodgers effect, and I just think the Steelers will be very dysfunctional. If he doesn't go in there and Mason Rudolph ends up being their quarterback, or if they trade for Kirk Cousins, I think they're gonna suck, and it'll be Mike Tomlin's first losing year. So I think there'll be chaos because of that. I think the offense struggling, then there'll be Arthur Smith. I just think the Steelers are going to be an absolute mess this year. And then you have DK Metcalf, all crying because he's not getting the ball enough after signing the big contract and stuff. So I just think there's a whole lot of Pittsburgh noise combined with being, is it called an ageist, I guess, if I'm pulling against the old guys and betting against them. Now, look, he did have 10 games of over 10 points in this scoring system out of a 17-game fantasy football season. So, and he never scored less than 6 points in any one game. I get it. So if you want to disagree with me and think he's got another year in him, fantastic. I'm just going to bet that this is the beginning of the end. I'm not saying he won't be useful. He'll be like number 25 to 30 useful, not top 24. So Cam Hayward, because of the Steelers' dysfunctionality and Father Time, that's why I'm pulling him off the list.
Bold, Ricky. Real bold. That's why we're here.
Yeah. Go bold or go home, man.
I'm already home, so.
All righty, one more for you. This one probably isn't too difficult, but let's talk about Grover Stewart in terms of he was number 20 last year. Why are you pulling him from the list?
Yeah, at first glance, I was thinking that maybe DeForest Buckner missing 5-6 games, whatever it was, maybe helps push his numbers up. And then I got looking at previous years. He actually did just as well as 2 years ago when he had, I guess, his quote-unquote breakout season. Very similar year. He is not a sexy player at all. Like he's just kind of a guy that's there. Similar to Osa, he's probably going to get shuffled out just because of other players' productions over trumping him more or less. And he's also getting older. He's, I think, going to be 32. I think this year. I'm going with that.
I don't remember.
I'm not taking the time to look it up. I'm just going to assume I'm right and go on. And it's just like being married. You assume you're right, and until someone tells you otherwise, you're right. So, but again, he's just kind of a guy who I think will just, like I said, get pushed out. I expect people with other higher ceilings to overtake him, and new system could. I see it being a little bit more of a problem for a guy like Grover Stewart, who could find himself with a little more rotational issues here over, DeForest Buckner is the guy. He is the main guy. He is probably the best defensive tackle you can get right now. He is the standard, the stud. And Stewart's kind of the beneficiary of any double teams or triple teams on Buckner. So I just don't have a lot of confidence in him. I can't really pinpoint it other than just age and rotational concerns and a new defense.
Did I hear you say age?
I did.
You did. I thought you did after giving me grief. So, you know what Jordan Davis, Tavondre Sweat, Grover Stewart have in common?
I do not. They're all big guys, it sounds like.
They're all really big nose tackle types that will never end up on Ricky Rod's teams. And so, granted, he's been fairly consistent over the years and all, but these nose tackle types that, oftentimes are asked to, swallow up blockers or whatever, and they don't have the pass rush juice, particularly in a league like this where you get rewarded. You do get rewarded for tackles. Defensive tackles do get more points for some of the tackles they get than some of the other positions. As we looked at the scoring system earlier, but if they're not really able to generate the sacks, I'm not interested in. Most of these nose tackle types are not, and I put him into that category. similar to Vita Vea as well. So that's why I wouldn't have him on the list either.
That's a very fair point. The bigger guys, they're there to be run stuffers and to eat up bodies, and that's not what you need in this type of scoring. Like we've alluded to several times, it's more about the sacks. Tackles are taking a back seat in this scoring, so it does change up our list quite a bit. Good call, Ricky. Let's look at one more of yours. And this guy, who has been considered one of the top guys at defensive tackle for several years now, multiple double-digit sacks, doesn't offer very much in tackles, but he's always had the sacks. Up until last year, he only had 5.
That is correct.
Chris Jones, is this 5-sack season a trend or just an enigma?
Well, so what's interesting is, okay, so I'm going to play the age card first. He turns 31 in July. So that's number one. Sean, I don't know if you looked, but do you know how many games last year that Chris Jones had more than 10 fantasy points in this scoring system?
Judging
And if
by
you don't
the
know, take a guess.
judging by the low sacks and not very many tackles, I'm gonna say he didn't hit it once.
He had 4 games of more than 10 points.
Okay.
And it wasn't like we're talking 30-point games or 40. He had a couple in the 20s. And the reason he did is of his 5 sacks, 2 came in one game, 2 came in another game.
Right.
So from a consistency perspective, most of the time, if you played him, he was killing your team. And last year, he was motivated to play. One of the things he talked about a lot is he wanted that third championship in a row, the first team ever to have 3 championships, and they didn't accomplish it. And now a year later, without that accomplish it, based on his stats from this past year, and as an owner in a couple of leagues of him, watching him not hustle to chase down a quarterback as the quarterback was kind of escaping around the edge or whatever. Oh, it was so frustrating. I'm like, come on, get the lead out your butt. So I think what will happen, there'll be a couple of games where there'll be on national TV or something along those lines where he's going to play his heart out, and he may have a few good games. But other than that, I just don't see it. So Chris Jones for me is coming off of this list.
Yeah, and the draft capital you have to give up for Chris Jones, with the name and the production in years past, it's a steep price to pay for only 5 sacks, 37 tackles. Yeah, disappointment right there with Quentin Williams. You give up a higher pick for the perceived top defensive tackles and not get the production out of it. That's a killer right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you emphasized it's better to have somebody who can give you a solid floor every week over 4 games of the year that are spikes and the rest are potential donuts.
Right, and 2 of those 4 really weren't spikes. He was over 10 points, but I wouldn't call them spike weeks per se. There was really 2 of those 4 that were spike weeks. So, but that's why we're here. We talk about reasons people fall in and fall out, but sometimes we get hung up on name recognition.
Sure.
Chris Jones, but Chris Jones is getting up there in age, and the productivity did decline this past year. So, Sean, I do need to do a quick sponsor read. Want to encourage everybody to try the new Fast Draft app. If you haven't tried it out, it's a lot of fun, and it is a fast draft. They also have IDP Fast Drafts, which if you've been following the IDP Advice show and following Sean and I through the past year on some of our other shows and so forth, hopefully you've learned a lot to be competitive and go win yourself some money. And you know what? With a first-time deposit of up to $50, you get that match. You put in 25, they'll match 25. You put in 50, they'll give you 50. You put in 100, they'll give you 50. Okay, got it? So deposit that $50. You got to use the code PLUS, PLUS, as in IDP Plus, and you can get that match. All righty. So hopefully this was helpful to get people thinking about who might be coming out. I hope you're challenging yourselves looking at this list as y'all are listening and watching and saying, who would I take off this list? Do I agree or not? We'll be monitoring the YouTube comments. So on this IDP Plus YouTube channel, on this IDP Plus Advice show. Go ahead and put your comments in, your thoughts, your questions, whatever, and Sean and I'll be looking to respond to those as a side note, okay? So now you've heard us talking about a lot of the folks we're taking out of the top 24, but now you want to know, okay, who are you guys putting in? So we're showing the list here. And once again, as a reminder, there's 11 that repeat, so 13 should be going in. Sean and I actually agreed on 7. We did not compare our list beforehand. We did our list independently. Then Sean's 8th one, because remember, Sean cheated. He only took out 8. So Sean's 8th one is the one in blue here. The 7 we agreed upon are in green. And then 9 through 14, the ones in purple, are my additional ones to replace the ones that I took out. So for those that are listening, the list is Derrick Brown, Christian Wilkins, who I'm now a little bit more concerned about, and someone we'll talk about, Jonathan Allen, Devontae Wyatt, Christian Barmore, Brian Brissett, B.J. Hill, Daron Payne, Jerzon Johnny Newton, Javon Hargrave, Derek Harmon, Mason Graham, so a couple of rookies in there, Jaron Reed, and Byron Murphy. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of these folks, but before we do, just want to mention one other thing about IDP Plus. Go to idpplus.com. Great content, great tools, rankings, a great Discord channel where Sean is in a lot, answering a lot of people's questions of all kinds, dynasty, redraft, offense, IDP, you name it kind of thing. He's in there to help out. People are in the middle of rookie drafts now for dynasty. There's people in there to help with that as well. But a lot of great tools as well that I can't stress enough how unique these tools are and how great they are for IDP in particular. So go check it out at IDP Plus. All right, Sean, I've walked through these people that we think we'd add. We didn't have quite, 100% agreement, but there were a lot we did agree upon. And one of the ones that you and I did agree on adding to this list is Jonathan Allen. So let's talk about Jonathan Allen and get your take on why you think he should be included in this list.
I've always liked Jonathan Allen. He's one guy who's consistently on my teams because he's a pretty consistent player, from tackles and sacks kind of fluctuate a little more, but he's always been about a 60 tackle guy. He can get you anywhere between 5, 9, 7, some sacks, which is good enough in this scoring to stay on this list, about middle ways or so. He was down last year because of injury. And so he played about half the season. I think he still popped off 3 sacks, 19 tackles. Nothing great, even for half the season. If you double those numbers, they're not fantastic. Part of that is because it was a new system over there in Washington with Dan Quinn coming in. But now he's going to a whole new system with Brian Flores, who has made defensive tackles look fantastic over the last several years. He got Harrison Phillips paid with that huge season a couple years ago. He was instrumental in Christian Wilkins and Zach Sealer earlier in his tenure with Miami there. So he's proven to get these guys, tackles, sacks, to use these guys in creative ways. And I think that's what really excited me here, to see him on a new team, revamped, so to say. He's 30, still okay age for defensive tackle. It's not a death sentence to get older on the interior line here. Still 6 years behind Cam Hayward and those guys.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
But yeah, I'm excited to see what happens here. I do think he will be the top guy between he and Harrison Phillips and the gravedigger himself, Javon Hargrave. I think he'll be the most consistent, most dependable one here. And I'm looking for probably I still see 50 to 70 tackles in his range, but I'm looking for a career year in sacks, honestly. With the way that defensive front is being set up in Minnesota, they can come from so many different angles with so many different people. Everybody's going to get a piece of the pie here, and it may bring the other guys down some, but I think Jonathan Allen is going to be the highest riser on this team.
Yeah. So I had, just as a quick related tangent here, I had both Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave, with both of them ending up in Minnesota, both of them coming to the top 24. I love, to your point about Fleury's system, you're going to have Grenard coming off the edge. You're going to have Van Ginkel coming off the edge, or sometimes blitzing over the middle, as they sometimes line him up in that inside linebacker position. Dallas Turner will have another year in the system, and hopefully I put on some more weight and more experience and so forth. I just think they'll be coming at them from all directions. I think the edges will draw the most attention, which will free up more so for even Allen and Hargrave to be really successful this year. So I really like both of these to jump into the top 24.
Absolutely. I'm a little worried with Hargraves. I believe he's a little older, 33-ish, 34 or something like that. I don't know if he's quite
No,
that old,
he's not quite that old.
But I think he's had a little more injury history here. And it took him a lot longer to really produce. That's something else we got to consider on some of this was defensive tackles. They don't just hit the ground running every year. This is something that takes a few years. That's one reason I was a little more reluctant to add some rookies in here. But I don't hate it because it's just as possible. We alluded to a returning guy, another returning guy a little earlier, or I did. Derrick Brown. Do you have anything else to add to him?
Yeah, just a little bit more. You hit it, really strong earlier on the conversation, Sean, and absolutely, both of us expect Derrick Brown to move back into the top 24. 2 years ago, he only missed one game last. He only played one game last year. Got injured in the first game of the year, so he's had the whole basically year to recover. This wasn't one of those situations where he blew out an ACL in January.
Right.
This happened back in September, so plenty of time to recover. The year before that, 103 combined tackles, 7 tackles for loss, now only 2 sacks, 6 pass defense, a true breakout year. And this is one of those, if we looked previous to what he did that year, this is one that I would expect that trend from that last year will continue, not a revert back to some of the earlier years, because of the system. You talked about how well Ashawn Robinson did in that role as well. So Derrick Brown all in on from the top 24 perspective, and he's only 27 years old. It's not like he's 33 trying to recover from that injury as well. So Derrick Brown definitely going to be the top 24. A little bit later, Sean, I'll just plant the seed here. I'm going to ask you if there's one or two of these that you think would jump into the top 6. Derrick Brown, I think, will be one of those that jumps into the top 6 as a side note.
I don't disagree with that at all. If Ashawn Robinson could get 80 tackles and 5.5 sacks, that's completely within Derrick Brown's floor. I would expect just a little more out of him. So, yeah, I could see him jumping all the way up there as well.
All righty. And so now let's switch gears. This one was an interesting one. Both you and I put him on our list separately, but we both went back to Christian Barmore, who, of course, dealt with that blood clot situation, very scary situation. Wasn't even clear if he was going to play again, play in the NFL ever again. But he came back, then they stopped him again, but he appears to be fully cleared for this coming year. Talk to us more about Christian Barmore.
That was the biggest key for me. He was one of the first names I wrote down to add to the list. It's just based on what we'd seen a couple years ago. And so as I'm doing this list, the news was broke out not that long ago, actually, that he was fully cleared, and they're expecting him to really take off. So, yeah, 2 years ago, he had his big breakout year, 8.5 sacks, 64 tackles, 13 for a loss, 16 quarterback hits. So that's a really good baseline for this type of scoring. Puts him right there in the middle of things, if not in the top 12. And, blood clots, I don't even think he started any games last year. I think they just kind of threw him in some plays and just kind of let him see where he's at. And so, yeah, pulling the plug last year had me thinking this guy's done. He's out of the league. And to be fully cleared and ready to go, that's big. That's real big. So he's going to be coming back, a whole new person. He's going to be amped up, ready to go. He's got a new head coach, Mike Vrabel. I forget who the defense coordinator is, but I believe he came over from Vegas. Coincidentally, in Vegas,
He coached with Vrabel in Tennessee,
in
and I can't
Tennessee.
remember the gentleman's
Okay,
name, and so can't remember his name either. But yeah, so Vrabel and he worked together when Vrabel was the head coach in Tennessee, so they know each other.
right. But I'm thinking while Vrabel was not coaching last year, he may have went to the Raiders. If not, I'll apologize for being wrong. But either way, there was a gentleman named Jeffrey Simmons there who did fantastic under Mike Vrabel. I could see him being the Jeffrey Simmons for the Patriots this year. I'm expecting big things. I'm looking for him to get back up to 6+ sacks and 60, 70 tackles. Yeah, I think it's going to be his year. He's gonna come back swinging for the fences. Yeah, after you think something's taken away from you, yeah, he's playing like a man possessed. I imagine. That's all I got, man.
No,
I'm
no, no, no,
psyched for
no
it.
disagreement. I think with Vrabel as his head coach, I think he's going to do. With him being fully cleared, I think he's going to return to the bar more of a couple years ago.
It's a really good feel good story too. If he does come back and really lights it up, has Pro Bowl, All Pro season, whatever, that would just be a really good feel good story as well.
Yeah, the only thing not feeling good about that is the fact that he's an Alabama guy. And for those that have been
Non-biased.
following, for those that are following an IDP Plus advice show for a while, know my LSU bias. And for those that are new to me potentially or new to us, you now know I have an LSU bias. Okay.
He kept it back as long as he could, folks. Did his best. This next guy, I find it really interesting that we both had him on the list because he was one of my later ads, and so one of my reasons was contract. It's a contract year for him, and I don't know if that was a big decision for you, but tell us a little more about Devontae Wyatt.
Well, so Devontae Wyatt, to your point on the contract, had his fifth year
Option
approved. What's the right word? I'm losing terms.
exercised.
Exercise. That's the word. Thank you. His fifth year was exercised. Quay Walker's was not. Now, there's a big difference in what they have to pay Quay Walker versus with a fifth year contract. Was for Wyatt. So it made a little bit more financial sense to do it. But still, they chose to do it. They didn't do like they did to Walker. So that was a good sign. They lost the nose tackle type, TJ Slayton. He signed with Cincinnati in free agency, which should finally create the opportunity for Wyatt to start next to Kenny Clark. I expect Clark to play more of that Slayton role and Wyatt to play more of that Clark role, which Clark was very unsuccessful in, had a terrible year and only had, I believe, one sack.
Yes.
And Wyatt was actually the defensive coordinator, Jeff Hafley, the former Boston College head coach, talked about Devontae Wyatt is their top interior pass rusher. And the PFF grades, so shout out to PFF, would support that he was the best interior pass rusher in terms of pass rush win rate. Well, that's hard to say, believe it or not, very quickly. Pass rush win rate among the Packers' interior defensive linemen. So in the sack-heavy league, that's a good thing. He only played roughly 40% of the snaps in several of the games last year. And so with Slayton moving on and Wyatt moving to the starting lineup, I expect that Wyatt's snaps will get up into that 65% range. So starting, not playing a nose tackle type of role, that fifth year option being exercised, but now playing for another contract, I think he can build upon the 5 sacks and 9 tackles for loss that he had in the 22 tackles. I'm expecting closer more to like 8 sacks, 14 tackles for loss, and nearly doubling his tackles from 22 to get into the 40 years range. So that's what I'm expecting from Wyatt. And that's my rationale for putting him into the top 24.
I don't hate any of that. Like I said, when I was digging through this, there's always 1 to 2 guys that get that big contract year, and he was the first one I thought of to really cash in here. And it's funny how money will motivate you to double your stats one year.
It'll be interesting to see if he has a great year. He gets rewarded with a big fat contract. Similar to what we learned from Matabwike and Harrison Phillips and a few of these others, maybe that's when we look to trade him next offseason if that's what ends up happening in our dynasty leagues.
Not a bad idea.
particularly when you think about the repeat rates that we're talking about here. So
absolutely.
All righty, we're gonna go back to you, and we've talked about the Washington system a little bit, or you mentioned it, Dan Quinn's system, and you added Deron Payne to this list. I did not, but you did. So I definitely want you to talk for our listening audience about Deron Payne and why you think he'll jump back into the top 24. Because he's one, in my opinion, that had that one peak sack year, came back down, and it sounds like you might be relying more on an increase in those sacks. But go ahead and elaborate, Sean.
Yeah, looking at his stats last year, they were sack-wise, he was right there at his average. It was his tackles that were down. And I'm thinking another year in this system, he's got Dutton playing next to him, who's another guy I was actually considering here too. I actually expect these guys to finish very similar, which would have them just inside the top 24. I was talking about Osa and whoever else maybe just sliding out. These are the guys that might just slide in. Because looking back at previous years, if they weren't in the top 24, they were just on the outside. So consistency is key here. If Payne can get his tackles back up, add a couple more sacks, and he's right there in that 20 range. And we've seen him hit the double digits before. It's clearly an outlier and not the norm, I'd say. But with the scoring for quarterback hits and TFLs and all, I've seen him get some pretty decent numbers in the past. Last year was not one of those years, which again, I'm assuming another year in the system, some more pieces added. I expect him to just sneak in there. I'm not expecting a giant blow up, double digit sacks or anything, but maybe 6 sacks, 60 tackles, right there with Jonathan Allen, basically. Jonathan Allen's averages before, I think, is where we could see Payne finish this year.
So you see Payne in that number 23 or number 24, the top 24, basically.
Basically, yeah. I think he just sneaks in where some of the others just happen to fall out. And I'm splitting hairs here on a lot of these guys. Because looking at, which you and I talked about this a little before the show, I looked at the 13 guys that didn't repeat from the year before, and half of them were because of injuries, and the rest are just some weird anomalies here and there. But it's almost trying to predict who's going to get injured and who's going to be healthy enough to sneak in. And predicting injuries is not an easy thing, because of the 6 that were injured, Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave were the oldest 2, and the others were actually fairly young, which is it's unbiased. It hits everybody, so it's tough to predict.
Unless you're really old, like 36 years old, and then I can predict it.
38 or whatever Calais Campbell is. Or 39. I hurt my arm today, so.
So, by the way, on Calais Campbell, I don't think he's going to get hurt. The reason I left him off the list, as we'll go on a quick tangent here, is that Arizona has stuffed the defensive line in free agency and in the NFL draft, and I just don't think he will get the snap count or some of the others. And it's part of the reason I really like Walter Nolan, the rookie, but it's part of the reason that I have Derek Harmon and Mason Graham in here, because I was thinking there's probably going to be a couple of rookies. Who do I think has the best shot? And Nolan, I just didn't think have a good shot, just like Calais Campbell wouldn't, because of the heavy rotations with the Dalvin Tomlinsons and the Justin Jones, Bilo Nichols, Darius Robinsons, even Jordan Birch can play a little bit inside during pass rush situations. I just think the snap count won't be there for those guys. It'll be a heavy rotation.
That was my exact thoughts also. The rotation is what scared me off of that. Given his age, this is I see it as his last year. He went back to Arizona. This is like the goodbye year, farewell tour. The heavy rotation, that scares me off just about every lineman there in Arizona. And to follow you up on the rookies, Mason Graham, the production was not there in college, which doesn't always translate to the NFL. You can't really do that, but I'm going to have to see it before I could add him in there. Uh, Kenneth Grant was one who I considered adding to this as a rookie, and because I see the clearest path to snaps for him over the other guys. And then looking in previous years, there were two Dolphins that finished in the top 24 all 3 years. Zach Sealer, Christian Wilkins when they were together, and then Calais Campbell, Zach Sealer again. So that system is showing that they can have two guys produce. And I almost put him in, but it's hard to trust rookie interior linemen to really hit the ground running and not to take a couple years to develop it and really turn into something. So one reason I held him off too, but he was my top consideration for rookies.
Yeah, so I typically don't have rookies on this list, but to the point you and I joked about as we were getting ready for the show is that when you're taking out 13, finding 13 to put in, you got to start digging pretty deep. And Mason Graham is one of those, since you brought him up, that when I was looking at the depth chart for the Browns, Michael Hall's injured, Shelby Harris 33.
Yep.
Briggs is a big nose tackle type. So it's him and oh crud, I can't believe I don't remember. Not Malik Collins. I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on who the other defensive tackle is that they have. But it's just those two. So I expect Harmon to get 75% of the snaps. Let me know when you get that name, by the way.
I know Tomlinson left. Dalvin Tomlinson is not there anymore. Malik Collins is the other guy.
It is Malik Collins. Okay.
Yes.
So I expect that Mason Graham will get 75% of the snaps, and as a result of that, sure. But particularly because I started thinking about the whole Travis Hunter thing. They traded away Travis Hunter. Mm-hmm. They need Mason Graham to reduce. They need him to be on the field. There's not that many defensive tackles. Michael Hall's knee injury was later in the year, by the way, so he's going to miss at least probably the first half of the year. Harris being 33, Briggs is a nose tackle type. So I think Graham's going to get a lot of playing time. If they lining up, stack him with right next to Myles Garrett, that is my hope and my argument that Graham sneaks into the bottom 24, the bottom of the top 24. That's my thought process.
I mean, it's a great situation for him to come into. And we've seen him be that game wrecker and still not produce the stats. But if he could get some quarterback hits in there, even tackles for a loss, they start piling up. And surely Myles Garrett's going to run somebody into him, right?
Exactly. That's a great point. And that's why I by the way, I didn't have Kalijah Cansey repeating, because he got a lot of into sacks in watching those games last year. So that's why I'm down on Cansey.
I considered that as well, but for per game production, solid. It was hard for me to fully kick him out.
Yeah. Some of those were kind of lucky for Cansey, so that's why I pulled him off the list.
Yeah, no, I get it. So,
but the other thing on there, just one other thing, do you think the Browns could be winning a lot of games or losing a lot of games?
Oh, they're not winning a lot.
I expect they're not going to win a lot either. And Vegas would agree with that. That's not a bold, risky take kind of thing. Okay?
Not at all.
Not at all. And so on the Mason Graham side of things, that means late in the fourth quarter, there could be a lot of running right up the middle as the other teams are just trying to run out the clock for a couple extra cheap tackles every game or so.
Absolutely.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So those were all part of my rationale for Mason Graham.
Not bad at all. I like the thought process there. I got one more I'm going to ask you about, but before that, I'm going to sneak something in here. I was doing some digging on MFL, and Cameron Jordan is now listed as a defensive tackle. Of course, they're switching to more of a 3-4 setup. So I assume he's going to be maybe kicked in slightly more than normal and probably have I'm guessing Chase Young is going to be over him. I assume Granderson's going to be on the opposite side. So what do you think about that move? With his position eligibility now at defensive tackle, does that make it's got to make him more appealing, right?
A little bit, but Cam has really fallen off as a Saints fan. For those
I hate
that
to
aren't,
see it.
I hate to see it. And way back when in one of my dynasty leagues, I had the choice of picking Cam Jordan or Cameron Hayward, and I went with the homer pick. And and even though I knew in my gut Hayward was probably the better pick even several years back, and I kind of regret it right now because I could have had Hayward's productivity all these years where Jordan has fallen off. So, once again, this is another age thing. I think him, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu. I think the Saints defense has a lot of age and they're going to suffer. And then the switch to the 3-4 on top of that. I don't think that it helps Jordan at all. I
Right.
agree with you. You have Young and Granderson on the outside, most likely playing those, outside edge kind of linebacker, outside linebacker kind of roles. And you have Pete Werner moving inside. I think this is horrible for Pete Werner with his tackling struggles.
Absolutely.
So I actually just drafted Danny Stutzman in a rookie draft in one of my dynasty leagues because I think it's a question of when, not if, Stutzman takes over for Werner because Werner can't tackle very well unless a miracle occurs. But back to your Jordan question, I don't think it helps him enough that he's even draftable or even to make the list. But you bring up a great point about one of the things that, whether it be my fantasy league, MFL as you called it, Sleeper, Yahoo, etc. Every year during the off season, they reevaluate the positions of some of these players. And I think there's one or two others you were telling me about, Sean, that have multiple player or multiple position capability or change positions that could be real gold mines for folks. So I don't know if you want to share one or two of those for people to be aware of. It's an important tangent as we're talking once again in general about, while we're focused on defensive tackles, interior defensive linemen today, we're talking about how to draft, a winning team for 2025. So what were some of those takeaways, Sean?
So, yeah, obviously the biggest one is Travis Hunter. I'm a sleeper, which is driving me insane, to be honest with you. I do not like his dual eligibility at both an offense and defensive position. He's a receiver who's going to play some defense, and he should not have cornerback eligibility. So that's
a hater. I disagree with you.
Yes. I'm not playing for money on sleeper this year if the IDP is involved.
No kidding.
Yeah, because I'm going to have to take him higher than I want just to keep somebody else from doing it.
Isn't that called strategy?
Yeah, my strategy is not to lose money on sleeper. But on Yahoo, he is strictly cornerback.
Not even wide receiver.
Not even wide receiver. Yeah, so Yahoo is stuck in the past where for years TJ Watt is a linebacker. So the old 3-4, 4-3, kind of rationale there. So just him, Joey Bosa, they've been linebackers forever now. This year, they are now linebacker and defensive end eligible. So that's actually helping them gain, some luster back, even though they're both about too old to enjoy it. Sometimes you can find a corner, with corner and safety eligibility. So you get a safety who you can put in as a corner. A guy like Josh Metellus has safety and corner eligibility, so he's probably one of the better cheat codes.
What about Jalen Carley? Is any of the
linebacker
who was a safety at Auburn? Coach drafted him to move to linebacker. Anything with him?
Yeah, so both Sleeper and Yahoo have him as a linebacker and a defensive back or safety. Yeah. So you
can use him in both spots.
So you can put him at any of them. So yeah, you could have, assuming it looks like he is going to be the starter next to Zaire Franklin, you could have him at safety or defensive back, depending on Sleeper, Yahoo, whatever. So yeah, that's another good one.
Well, that's a great cheat code, and the medalist one is a cheat code as well. And I don't know how that's different from Travis Hunter, but I digress.
Offense versus defense. Like if you look at how most scoring is set up, even if he's like the third or fourth highest receiver on his team, it's going to outdo just about every corner. So
I'm teasing, of course.
It drives me nuts. But enough of that.
But the important thing, then, I'm glad you brought up Cam Jordan because it's a great example. And as you're looking at your teams, and you're planning your draft boards and so forth, be sure you look at the position eligibility and where people have changed, where
Yeah,
there might be opportunities to give you some position flexibility when you're drafting, if you could put them in multiple spots, or it might even bump up their value depending on where they're moved to, or
sure.
maybe if they're moved from, say, safety to cornerback, maybe it bumps down their value. So great lesson for our listeners for today.
Cheat codes, knowing your scoring, knowing which positions are, how many you need of each position. All things you got to check every league, every single league. If not, you're in trouble. Somebody's going to find that cheat code or that scoring even exploit. I've had leagues where guys got points for punt returns that went overlooked, and like 1 point per yard. This is 20 years ago. And so you take a punt returner back then, they actually had a lot of return yards. So you're getting 1 point per yard. The guys, Dante Hall might get 120 yards right off the bat, and that's 120 points. Like, that's insane scoring. But always pay attention to what your league set up as. But
Exactly.
to get back to this list, we're talking rookies. We talked about Mason Graham. You think Derek Harmon is going to jump onto this list?
I do. And one of the great things about him going to Pittsburgh, I think he's a great fit for the system.
I agree.
6'4", 313 pounds. Guy runs a 4.95 40. One of the other things I love for pass defenses and so forth, 83 and 3/4 inch wingspan. He's not even yet 22. 2 solid years at Michigan State, even better year after he transferred to Oregon. So he's super athletic for his size. He can win with strength and he can win with speed bursts as well. And now his rush moves and all, he has some work to do on there, but he gets to learn from Cam Hayward, who will be injured on the sideline, will have plenty of time to
Oh
mentor
no!
him and teach him how to become the next Cam Hayward.
Oh man!
Plus, the other thing that will help him is before Hayward gets hurt, along with Keanu Benton, who I do expect to take another leap forward this year, not enough to the top 24, but I do expect him to improve. You got Watt and Highsmith on the outside. You got Herbig on the outside. If those guys need a break, I love Jack Sawyer going into that system as well as a side note. So I think you got, plenty of pass rush juice to help him out as well. And I think a lot of that stuff sets up well for him. He is an excellent penetrator. I think he can get 70% of the snap share. So a little bit work on the tackling, a little bit coaching on pass rush moves, staying a little bit lower. He sometimes gets a little bit high in his stance. Probably when he gets tired, he'll get in better shape in Pittsburgh with Mike Tomlin all over him before the Steelers implode. And so Derek Harmon, though, I see him jumping in the top 24. I see Mason Graham barely sneaking in. I see Derek Harmon somewhere in that 18 to 20 range this coming year.
It's going to be hard to do that on the bench while Hayward is lighting it up again.
No, he'll. Well, even if he is, he'll be on the opposite side. If Hayward somehow survives, and I'm wrong, Ben, Harmon will be on the other side of him. So not too worried about it.
That would actually be an outstanding duo out there. I do believe that would be a lot of fun. I do hope we actually see that. Yeah, to your point, man. What a great player to learn from. Steelers culture. Hayward's been there forever. Team leader. I think with a good coach like Tomlin and good team leaders like Hayward will keep the Steelers from imploding. They sneak in and get that winning season thanks to the one and only Mason Rudolph after Aaron Rodgers gets injured.
All right. If you want to not lose money like on that Yahoo League, don't bet on that either, Sean.
I'm starting to see a pattern where I just shouldn't bet money.
All right. Well, look, on that note, we're gonna bring to close our look at the interior defensive linemen and defensive tackles. For those that might have been listen only, you can come to the YouTube channel. You can see the list, the IDP Plus Advice, IDP Plus channel. Look for the IDP Plus Advice show. Come and you can see and relook at our list and so forth. But we're going to preview the defensive ends in the top 24. But before we do, one other call out for the Fantasy Football Expo. Get your Fantasy Football Expo tickets at the fantasyfootballexpo.com. The word "the" is in front of Fantasy Football Expo. It's in Canton, Ohio, every year. This Kings Classic that we alluded to, that's where the competition actually occurs at the home of the Hall of Fame. The drafts actually happen in the Hall of Fame. If you want, you can come and watch in the background and so forth. Um, I've been lucky to be in the Kings Classic Butkus division since it started, named after the famous Dick Butkus, and some really strong competition there. But there's also, you'll see on the other, you'll see the Jeff Manns of the world, the Bob Harrises of the world, many of the folks that you hear on Sirius XM or see online. Many of those folks will be in attendance as well. So there's some great packages to meet some of those content creators as well. You can tour the Hall of Fame, just wonderful stuff. August 8th through 10th in Canton, Ohio. I'll be there. I would love to meet many of you. And unfortunately, Sean has a personal commitment that he won't be able to be there, but hopefully he'll be there to meet you next year because you love it so much you'll go back for a second time and third, fourth, and so forth, as I've been doing as well. Okay, so now, Sean, I'm going to pull up to give people a taste of the top 24, and you're not going to be allowed to cheat for our next show. You're going to have to do 13 pulled off of this list, which might even be harder than the defensive tackles, because only 11 of the top 24 edge repeat, and only 4 of the top 12 edge / outside linebacker / defensive end. Okay. So once again, we're doing true position, which many of the leagues, and particularly my fantasy league, has moved to. And there's some tough names to have to pull off of this list.
Yeah. You're making me do 13. I'm going to have to split so many hairs here. It's going to be wild. Although I do see a couple guys missing already who I expect to jump back on this list. So that's going to help at least 2 picks.
Right. I'm going to give you, one right off the bat, TJ Watt.
You're taking him off?
He may be off the list, and we'll have to discuss that in our show next week. So that's our teaser for everybody, because when you look at these names, many of these, if you were ranking your board of these 24, probably most of them would be in your top 30 if you were looking straight ahead. But the statistics say 13 of these 24 will not repeat in the top 24 next year. So in our next show, you have to come and tune in. We're going to talk about who and why we think is going to fall out, and just importantly, who is going to move in to this list. And Sean, no cheating, like I said. It's going to be
cheating. I have to get to the bottom of Ricky's hatred for the Steelers. It's becoming personal. I'm not even a Steelers fan, and I'm starting to get offended by
it. There's nothing personal. Just there's just some gut feelings there. All righty. So, Sean, any closing thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up the show today?
I have nothing other than I will not cheat next week. I will somehow get 13 people off of this list and 13 new people on it.
Well, the thing I want to leave with our listeners in terms of my wrap-up comments related to this exercise is, look, it's easy to assume that goodness continues, or that goodness will happen. What really can help you to become a fantasy football player is also looking at the other side of the lens, which we're trying to do here, and what could go wrong that could cause these people to fall out as well. And so hopefully, even from that, hopefully getting some of that education as part of your thought process as you're building your draft boards. And we're going to continue position by position and give you some things to challenge your thinking related to, your boards for the coming year. Okay.
Yeah. And I will go over these again. Like I said, I went over last year or 23 to 24, the 13 that were missing from that previous year in the defensive tackles. I broke down the injuries and just some other, like one guy retired, some weird anomaly stuff. I'll try to do that with this list as well to see what the injury rate is of the guys that do not repeat.
Okay. That'll be great for our audiences and for us to consider as well, because that's a study I haven't done yet. That'd be great.
Which, looking at this list, it can't be that many that were off of it because of injury. One very big one in particular is definitely off right now. But
right.
Yeah.
So get ready for our next show, folks. And so, look, if you like the show, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel, to IDP Plus channel, if you haven't subscribed yet. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, agreements, disagreements, put it in the comments on the YouTube channel, and Sean and I will be monitoring it periodically and responding to those. Give us a follow at RickyRod66 and Sean8386 on X as well. And of course, if you missed previous shows, by the way, the last show that I did, or 2 shows ago, on my IDP offensive and IDP rookie draft board is in the 1,600 view range. So people are getting a lot of value out of it. So if you haven't checked that one out, you haven't had your dynasty drafts, go check that out as well. With that, we'll see you in about another week or so. On behalf of my partner in crime, Sean Teague, this is Ricky Roderick wishing you, your family, and your friends great health and happiness. Be kind to one another. And we're out of here, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.